Honestly, I haven't really gotten anything done on Carlson in like a year.
I was struggling a lot with motivation. I could feel myself slowly falling out of love with game development.
Every game developer gets hit with burnout, meaning only a tiny fraction of those who start ever even finish their first game. We've all been there, yearning to finish your dream project but struggling and slowly losing confidence in your dream. The thing is, it turns out that every developer who consistently releases successful games, like Thin Matrix, Jonas Tyroller, and yes, even Danny, have mastered 3 simple strategies that let them constantly bring their dream ideas to life and even make a living off of their games. But to learn these secret strategies, we're going to need to leave the comfort of the studio and travel to a very dangerous reality, a dark land where indie games go to die. Calibrate teleporter. We're here. Feels awfully familiar. Now, if my calculations are correct, we should be right next to Carlson. There it is. Oh, you don't know what Carlson is? Well, it's a game you're never going to play because Danny made one crucial mistake that caused his now 2-year-long burnout and counting, and it's probably the same mistake you're making right now with your game. See, most indie game developers are sprinters. They spend all their energy right away, get a lot done all at once, and feel great, but only at first. Because after a very short time, you're completely spent. But game dev isn't a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a mountain climb because it gets steeper and steeper the higher you go. And if you try to sprint, you're just going to fall. This is something that Carl, or Thin Matrix, realized really early on. And you can actually see his method to counter the sprinter mentality in almost every single one of his devlogs. As a good mountain climber, Carl knows that you need to maintain a steady pace, whatever that is for you, and enjoy the journey. That's why you always see him jogging, cooking, gardening, and seeing friends. So it's no wonder that he has the motivation to work on his games for the years it takes to get them done. This also means that you actually get more done in the long run, because if you try to sprint and work non-stop, you spend most of that time resting, and once you start to realize that is when the burnout hits you. Hello? Hey, listen, I'm calling you through an interdimensional relay. What? No time to explain. Listen, have you heard of a game called Ovis Nova? Yeah, it rings a bell. Okay, so Ovis Nova was one of Jonas Tyroller's earlier games. It was the perfect example of the second path to burnout, because when Jonas worked on Ovis Nova, he had the consistent mountain climber pace. But at this stage, you realize that you have so many features to implement and so many conflicting ideas for new mechanics that can't all possibly work together, that you can't decide where to start or what to choose, and you get stuck. You tell yourself you'll get back to it, but for some reason you just never do. Yeah, but he and Paul completely avoided this with Thronefall. This type of burnout is called game dev writer's block. And the only reason Jonas and Paul got around it is because before they even started working on their game, they used the blacksmith approach. When a blacksmith makes a sword, he blasts the metal with heat, he bashes it with a hammer, and grinds it to shape, throwing away all the extra slag so that only the polished, perfected form of the sword remains. Jonas and Paul did this by scrutinizing their idea, making a bunch of prototypes, and constantly getting feedback from players to only include those features which added to the core of the game, and not add anything that would turn it into a massive mess. Now, you probably think that you have a great game idea because it's just what you want to make. But if you want to avoid burnout and see that idea actually come into fruition, you have to be able to answer these 4 questions.
What is your game? Who is it for? Why will people want to play it? And what makes it stand out?
If you don't nail your game idea early, you will run into game dev writer's block, so I highly recommend you grab my free indie game dev starter guide PDF in the description. I go into a lot more detail about this and talk about all the different parts of game development, including an introduction to programming, game design, and even marketing. So go ahead and grab that in the description. Now let's get back to other Andre. I noticed a pattern with all the games I'm finding here, and it all comes back down to mountain climbing. Every mountain climber dreams of climbing Mount Everest, but most people don't think they ever could. You can climb Everest with as slow and consistent a pace as you want. You're still gonna run into altitude sickness and so many other problems that I can't even begin to guess. In other words, most games here are basically the Everest of indie games. They're just enormous and leave us wandering in the cold. But believe it or not, it's actually none other than Danny who solved this Everest problem. See, Danny's first game off the sticks is down here too, probably for the same reason as Ovis Nova. Carlson turned out to be an Everest game too. So how did Danny release 5 super successful games in between Off the Sticks and Carlson? To explain what made those games so different, I need to tell you the story of someone that you've probably never heard of before. Curtis Stone. See, Curtis wanted to be a farmer, only he had one massive problem: He was broke. He didn't have any land to farm on, but being the innovative entrepreneur that he is, he decided to try something totally new. He asked people if he could turn their backyards into micro farms, overhauling their yard's health and providing them with a share of the food for free. But that still wasn't enough space for traditional farming. So instead he figured out a way to use quick growing crops that he could harvest in just a month, which actually let him harvest 5 times per season. Danny figured out the same strategy for game development by accident. After taking a break from Off the Sticks, he made a mobile game in one day and ended up making over $1,000 off of it in only a week. That's $108 per hour, by the way. Eventually he made Muck, which is completely free, so of course it got a ton of attention, and not just by his audience. People actually asked him to make in-game purchases, which with the amount of players it amassed, it definitely made him a pretty penny. And based only on when the videos were released, it looks like it made him only about 4 months to finish Muck entirely. For Danny, making these games instead of what he initially thought was his dream ended up being incredibly beneficial. But you don't have to set your dream game aside. That said, if you don't build up the habit of finishing and releasing games, not necessarily for the money, because Danny's a special case, but for the learning and for the habit, you'll be filling yourself up with unrealistic expectations for your dream game. So to make sure you get through that process quickly and even start making some money off of your games in less than a year, watch this video next, because in it I give you the 3 basic steps to make the most out of your first few months as an indie game developer, so you can give your dream game the skill and discipline it deserves. Thanks for watching and God bless. I really should get back to working on my game though. Here we go.